Hello everyone, I'll make a start. Thanks for all sticking around for my talk on sound. Usually when you start talking about sound, everyone just loses interest and leaves, so hopefully I'll keep you entertained for this. I think that the title of my talk is probably pretty kind of what the industry is turning into, really, and some of the problems that we face as sound engineers and sound designers. There's been lots of new toys and things that have kind of appeared in recent years which have definitely been at the detriment to getting good sound. So hopefully this talk will give you some idea as to why you should get good sound and what good sound can do. I wanted to start with a quote. I realised I didn't actually know any, so I Googled, and I found this one by David Lynch, and he's pretty famous. So yeah, basically half your film is sound, and it's the most regularly kind of neglected part of the filmmaking process. So first I thought to start as to why sound gets neglected compared to filmmaking. I mean, a lot of people just want to pick up a camera and go out and shoot cool stuff and then totally forget about sound. Firstly, I think this is probably partly to do with this, is that basically the better you do your job as a sound designer or a sound engineer, the less people actually notice that you've done a good job. You know, you can come back from a shoot and be like, oh, I shot that amazing drone shot, you know, it was amazing, and the sunset. But then if you come back and you're like, oh, I've got this amazing like wild track of some birds tweeting, you know, no one really cares. And also perhaps is slightly less cool than visuals. But hopefully through this talk I can kind of explain why sound is important and why, you know, why you should pay some more attention to it. And really the first one is the biggest thing, is it really enhances the visuals. You know, you can have a great camera shot, but if it's got poor sound, then it just kind of falls apart. And you can add mood to your film, create tension, suspense. But also, it's one of the most noticeable things in amateur productions is crap sound, and I see it in so much of adventure filmmaking, where the filmmakers spent days and days kind of get one amazing shot, and then, you know, it's wind rumble and it's just terrible sound, and it really lets it down. But sound also can be used on its own, really, to kind of tell stories, and I think this is quite a good example of that. This is a short clip from one of our recent productions where basically there is no visuals and the sound really just tells a story on its own.
It was really terrifying going down the mine. You went from light into total darkness. You're basically descending a hole in the ground, 800 metres, 3,000 feet, 120 men, all jammed into this little container. And as you're dropping at about 8 metres per second, very, very quickly, there's a bit of a weightlessness feeling in your stomach, a little bit like being on a roller coaster. You feel a little bit sick. You come across these flashes of light, and what that is as you're going down, you've got horizontal seams that are working with other seams. So as you're going down, and there are these layers, almost like a cream cake. And the cream is coal that's being worked. It just flashes with light, and then you're back into the darkness.
So as you can see, I don't know if you can actually really hear that very well, but it's basically it's going down into the mine and describing what it's like to be down the mine. And through removing all the visuals, you really kind of get that impression that you're inside this lift and you're going down with him. So I'm just going to quickly run through the kind of full process of getting good sound. So hopefully by the end of it, you'll have a good understanding of it. So I'll start at the beginning with location sound, which is really where it all starts. And this adage of shit in, shit out is definitely very true when it comes to sound. You know, I hear it so often when you're on location and the director turns around to you and says, oh, it's all right, we'll fix it in post. And that is rubbish. You know, what you're really looking for is you want to get really good quality sound from the beginning, and it'll save you so much time, and you know, it's really, really important. And unfortunately, I'm sure probably a lot of you use one of these to shoot with, but they're actually one of the kind of worst things when it comes to sound, really. They're not, I mean, they're great for taking photos, less so for video, mainly for the fact they've got no sound facilities, really. You can get some kind of add-on boxes for them which kind of do the job, but really, if you really want to get good location sound, you really need to get a proper video camera. And really what you're looking for from a camera is Most video cameras now have two XLR inputs, which is a really good quality mic input, and there's loads of options there for using radio mics, and also you can control the levels of each microphone, which is something that it's very difficult to do on a DSLR. And then this is our kind of standard setup for our kind of shoot, if we're out shooting climbing or biking or anything like that, is we have two mics. Usually we have the same setup on two cameras on our shoot. So we have, basically on a standard climbing shoot, we have someone hanging off a rope on the wall, and then someone who's shooting another shot, like a long shot from the ground. And then both cameras will basically have a microphone attached to the top of it, and then we'll have radio mics on each of the climbers so that you can pick up kind of breathing sounds. The top mic is much better for kind of just getting the kind of ambient sounds of the location, wind, things like that. And a really good top tip for using radio mics is if you use auto gain on them, so that it can control the level, so you can get the really quiet kind of breathing sounds, and then you don't get really poor sound when they start screaming and shouting. And this is just a little kind of demo of that. So basically, you can see in the shot here, we've got the radio mic transmitter on the climber, and then that's basically just attached to the top of the camera, and the shotgun mic is there also just to kind of pick up better quality sound as well. So that's really kind of location. And then the other really important thing is interview. As Paul said before, you really need to get good quality sound when you're recording your interviews, because it's really difficult when especially if it's out of vision, as Paul said before, it needs to be as clean as possible, otherwise it's really distracting. Generally also, my preference is always for indoors for kind of key interview. Often that's not always an option, but really that's the only place where you can really control the sound. Also, I always use top mics for interviews. I don't usually ever use radio mics. And this wild tracks is basically where you just, at the end of the interview or the start of the interview, you basically just make sure everyone is completely silent and you just record the sound of the space. And that's really useful when it comes to editing, because you can kind of smooth over any kind of noises in the background or anything like that. The other really important thing to do is also assess the space that you're in. Try and avoid, well, I mean, this room, for example, you can hear there's quite a lot of echo and reverb. That's usually really difficult then when it comes to editing, because it really detracts from it, and often you start to kind of lose what the person is saying. And the main way to really avoid that is position the mic as close as possible. This is kind of just a good example of that, really. So this is an interview we did recently. So we've basically got the mic here, which is really close to the person speaking, but also against this kind of backdrop of all these T-shirts, which is a great surface, because it's not a hard surface, so the sound isn't bouncing off that, it's just kind of dissipating, and you don't get any kind of echo or reverb from that. The other really important thing for location is monitoring audio. I see it so often where people will have a good sound setup, but then will not actually bother to check that what they're recording is what they think they're recording. And and you get into the studio and you realise there's hum or buzz or something that's basically ruined everything that you've shot. And this thing here is what we call the happy helmet, which we use for climbing quite a lot, where basically you've just got a standard climbing helmet, and then we basically just bolt a set of really good headphones to it. And that means that you can kind of hang off your rope and you protect your head, and also monitor really good audio. It's also great in winter because it means that it keeps your ears warm, which is a definite bonus. So yeah, that's really the kind of the location stuff. It's relatively straightforward once you actually kind of know what you're doing, but it's also really the stage where you can really mess up everything. So I'll quickly move on to the post-production side of things. This is really kind of where sound gets kind of fun. You've recorded your great location audio and it's it's pristine, but then it's only really when you kind of take it into the studio and you have just endless possibilities to really kind of just perfect what you've done and really kind of go to town on it. But really, before I'll start talking about actual sound for post-production, I just wanted to have a quick slide on things to remember. Often in sort of smaller productions, the video editor will be you, so this is always great, but always when I work with a new video editor, I'll have a conversation with them about things that are really important, and it happens on so many projects where I'll get sent the files for the film, and I'll just open it and it'll be a complete mess. There's things everywhere, and I spend days just doing stuff which if the video editor had known about it in the first place would have just kind of not been an issue, and it would have saved you tons and tons of time. So those are kind of the key ones. Is when you're editing the video, don't really worry about sound too much. I see a lot of the time where video editors will have added fades and sort of started messing around with the sound. You know, that's not really their job, and you know, it wastes time in the long run. But this one is something that I wanted to put on a slide all by itself. It's a concept that seems so simple, but video editors seem to get it wrong all the time, where they'll have kind of edited their film and then they'll send it to you, and it's like, oh, make this amazing soundtrack for me. And then, you know, a week later you'll have spent days and days working on it, and they'll call you up and they're like, oh, just change those couple of shots and change the length of one of these scenes. And then by doing that, you've then thrown all of the audio out of sync, and basically you have to start all over again. And they don't often really appreciate that that is the case. So that's really the most important thing, is that once you've, you know, picture lock, where you've basically edited your film and you know all the clips, that is locked. I mean, you can go in and, you know, grade clips and add titles and things like that, but the actual kind of in and out points of each clip then really can't change unless you want to start all over again. So post-production for sound really is split into kind of 4 key areas, and this is kind of in order of how I would do it for any project, really. So the first thing when you get sent your film that you're working on is organisation of audio, where basically you just kind of structure stuff into tracks so you know where everything is. Then you go in and you kind of do all of the kind of little bits of just restoration work, really, on any location sound that's, say, got rumble on it, or a lot of the time if you're recording inside you'll have like a buzz which is from mains electricity. So you have to kind of go in and remove that to kind of get it really clean. And then the third stage is probably the most enjoyable part of sound for me, is sound design, where really you can kind of go to town and, you know, really kind of just get into it and create mood, atmosphere, all those sorts of things. And then finally after that you mix all the different sounds so that all the levels are smooth, and then you export it, and hopefully then, you know, you've got your finished film. So I'll just go through each section kind of individually. Stage 1, as I said, is kind of the organisation of your project, and it's the thing that really then saves you time in the long run. There's nothing worse than when, you know, you're kind of really getting into the sound design and you suddenly realise you can't find an interview clip because it seems to have disappeared, or it's on a different track or something like that. So this is the kind of order that I split stuff into. So I have individual tracks in my audio software for each of these things. So I'll have all of the kind of location sound split onto, you know, multiple tracks. And then interviews are separate, then music, and then ambience is kind of things like wind noise. Like we have a file which is called Big Windy Mix, which is basically a mixture of different wind sounds that we made, and we use that all the time. So that's kind of artificial layering of sounds that kind of really just enhance the scenes. And then all the sound design. And then this last thing is just, I'm not sure everyone actually does this, but I do, is I never actually will delete a sound file ever from any sort of session. What I'll do is I'll just drag any clip that I think, oh, you know, I don't need that, it's superfluous or anything. I'll move it to a track which is it's called the dead track, and it's muted, you can't hear it, but it does mean it's there, and you can come back to it if you need to. It happens so often where you'll suddenly realise you've accidentally deleted the whole key interview, and then, you know, you have to start looking through your recovery files to try and find the one from like 3 days before where you hadn't deleted it. And I'm a bit OCD, so I also color code all my tracks. So this is basically an example of a sound session this is for Redemption. So as you can see, I've got basically all this top bit is the interviews, and then location, and all the rest of it down here. And what I do is I basically have all of these kind of categories are then routed through one track, which is basically you can then switch sections off as and when you want. So if, you know, say you just want to work on the interview, but you need to kind of get rid of everything else so you can actually just hear what's going on, you can just hit mute on 2 tracks rather than having to go through and, you know, remove everything. So that's really helpful. And so once I've done all the kind of organisation and everything's there, I then just move on to the, as I said, restoration. So it can be as time consuming as you make it. I mean, you can spend days and days and days restoring audio, and that generally this process is directly linked to your ability to get good location sound. Often I'll get sent projects, it'll be a really tight deadline, and I waste the entire time that's available restoring badly recorded interview rather than actually being able to do things like sound design, which is really what kind of enhances it. So the EQ is great. You can basically, I don't know, I presume hopefully some of you know what EQ is, but you can kind of use that to kind of remove certain parts of the frequency spectrum, so you can kind of get rid of like low, like rumbly sounds and hiss and things like that. And you can also spend lots and lots of money. There's great pieces of software like this Isotope, which is about £1,000, but that's amazing at removing all sorts of kind of bad kind of sounds. And then also just kind of make any notes for the next process on things that maybe you realise that after you've done all the restoration you just can't redeem it, and you're going to have to just make it from scratch in sound designs. So sound design, as I said, is absolutely brilliant. I love sound design. It's what I enjoy the most. This is where you create story and sound, and often it is also the only choice. As I said, although getting great location sound is the key, often it's just not possible because you've shot from a drone or it's in slow motion and therefore there isn't any sound. And so it's all has to be done in post in the sound design process. And these next two clips are hopefully a good example of that.
And it's just a great place to be up on that head wall. It's very like freeing. You're in that rest before the hard section. The wind starts blowing, and no other concerns apart from just those moves that lay right in front of you.
Take out.
Caroline actually, she tells me always that I climb way better on trad than I do on sport. I'm somehow able to dig deeper and try harder, and I can do moves and sequences that I wouldn't otherwise do if I was climbing on bolts. You arrive at a point where it doesn't even matter that you're up there massively run out from the gear.
But then I'd like to compare this to what was actually given to me when at the start of the sound process, just to kind of make you appreciate what the challenges are with sound. So that was the kind of end result. That's what ended up in the film. But this is what it was like when it was sent to me. So I think that's a good example of what you can really do with sound design. Yeah, I don't think we really need to say much more than that, but I just thought I'd just quickly go through that sequence as to kind of how that was then split up. And it's basically, a lot of that is just kind of stuff that I've created in the studio. So you can't really hear it through these speakers, but there's lots of kind of like low frequency rumbling, and you can hear his heartbeat, and then there's this kind of high pitched kind of whistling sound, and a few then kind of, on top of that, I then added a load of wind. Wind is great, it's a great kind of way to visualize just being in those locations. And then on top of that, I had a little bit of location audio, which was just James kind of breathing heavily. And then on top of that was James's interview. So that was basically all of that. That entire scene was started from scratch in post, and none of it was actually location. So really, like when it comes to approaching like what to do when in the sound design process, because often it's very intimidating. You kind of have this blank slate of just nothingness, and it's kind of working out what to do to kind of fill that really. So I always just start kind of watching something through, usually with the sound on mute, and just imagining what I would think I would be hearing in that situation, and then kind of try and work out how I can create mood and tension, or it really depends on kind of what the scene is. So watching it on mute is a great way of doing that, because it lets your mind kind of start to imagine what you should be hearing. So this is a really good example of this, is using like kind of rumbling sounds to kind of create tension, and that really goes back to kind of, you know, when we're living in caves, and low frequencies generally meant danger. You know, there's earthquakes, volcanoes, floods, or anything like that. And so that, without really thinking about it, it makes you feel quite tense and uptight. And that's a great way of you know, creating tension in film, is to have that kind of constant low frequency kind of rumbling sound. Also, the other great thing is for sound design is Foley, which I'm sure some of you have probably seen, which is basically doing stupid things in studios or wherever, just jumping up and down, trying to recreate the sounds that you see on screen. So, I mean, I've spent so much time kind of in a studio wearing a harness with loads of gear on it, kind of pretending to be Dave McLeod, kind of jangling up and down as he's kind of climbing. And it's amazing how well it works, because if your brain's kind of expecting to hear a certain sound, it will automatically link it to the thing that you're seeing, and it's very hard to notice when you've actually faked it and you've recorded it in a studio, you know, ages later. And you can do it with everything, really. I mean, it's the only thing you really can't do is with dialogue. And there's various kind of, you can either record them yourself, that's the best way really to kind of get the sounds, but there are a lot of online libraries where you can either buy sounds, or you can actually download a lot for free. This website's great, and I actually use it all the time. And it's basically kind of like just an open source site where anybody can upload a sound. So it's kind of, you know, you've got some kid in India's recorded a moped going past his house, or some guy in America, or anything. So generally, and you can search for sounds with keywords, and so generally you can find absolutely anything you could ever want to find. And it's amazing what people will have recorded. But also the other really good thing to do is to actually, if you have the time, often you don't, but if you're on a location and you know, you maybe feel like you've not got the sound that you really want from that, you can then just spend a bit of time at the end of the day where all you do, you know, you're not filming, you're literally just trying to record decent sound. And this is a good example of that. This is on a shoot on Skype. So that was a film called The Ridge. Hopefully somebody's seen it. But this was kind of like the end sequence to the film, and so it was all very, very tense as to whether he was actually going to be able to do it. And so when it actually came to him trying it for real, there was just no real option for getting good quality sound, because it was all shot on sort of steady cams and things like that, and there was just no chance that you were going to get really clean sound. And so basically, between takes, we just kind of spent about 10 minutes just recording him hitting the fence and things like that. And that is actually what you hear in the final film. So it's a really useful way of doing that. And the great thing is, if you record stuff yourself, is you can build up your own sound libraries. I think the last time I checked, I had like 300,000 sounds in various hard drives. And that's great, because then it's amazing how often you'll be working on a project and you think, oh, I really need that very specific sound, and you realize that you've used something similar in the past. And it's great that you can then just kind of quickly nip in and find it, and it saves you just so much time. So that's a really useful kind of thing to kind of start doing if you're really into kind of getting really good quality sound. And then the final stage is the sound mix, which should be relatively simple, but is also often the sort of place where people really mess it up. The temptation a lot of the time is to make things as loud as possible. I think this kind of comes from the music industry, where every track is really in your face, as loud as it possibly can be. You've got no dynamic range, and that's really because you're contending with everyone else on the radio or whatever. But really, to really get the most out of the sound, you really want to have a really wide dynamic range. And what I mean by that is you want to have really, really quiet sounds and really, really loud sounds. And by reducing the kind of difference between the two, it can make it really tiring to listen to things, because everything is just really in your face. So really kind of just don't go overboard, basically. So this, I won't go into too much technical detail, but try and usually leave about 6 decibels of gain at the top, which is just for extra headroom, basically. And that's really it. And then once you've sound mixed it, you just hit export, and hopefully that's all it. And you basically then just bring it back into your video editor on one track, and then you then add it to the video, and then you export the film. Another thing that's really useful is to export stems of the film, and we do this with all our projects, which is basically where we mute everything else and just have the interview for the film. So there's big gaps of just silence, and then we'll have one with location and one with music, What that means is in the future you can often come back to an edit. Because what I said before about not changing edit points in a film, often you'll be working for a brand and they'll want a re-edit or something like that. And to save you having to then remix the entire film, if you export them all individually and then just have them in your editor, you can then start chopping stuff around and it's already mixed, and it really just saves a ton of time. So I thought I've rattled through that quite quickly. But if anyone's really interested in learning more about sounds, these are just a few kind of good resources for that. Walter Murch is really kind of the god of sound design, so I really recommend that you read that book. It's not just about sound as well, it's also, a lot of it is about editing, so it's really useful. And there's a couple of really good websites, which again, taught you through absolutely everything to do with sound. And that's it really.